Welcome to this episode of Diversity and Inclusion Now. My guest is Charlene Brown Wyans. She's a friend, she's a soror, and she's also a retired police officer. And this segment is really to learn more about who she is. And then the next one, we'll get into a concept that she started, living while Black, blue, and pink. And then we'll close with a couple of things around the culture within the police department. So now we'll hear from Charlene Brown Wyans. Welcome, Charlene, to this segment of Diversity and Inclusion Now. I'm really excited about this. We've been talking about it for a long, long time, and a lot has happened. I mean, we've been in quarantine now for months, and so this is going to be a great discussion about what you've been up to, who are you, and where you're headed. So before we get into all of that, first, tell me about Charlene Brown Wyans. I'm sure I'm going to learn about things I didn't know about you before, but let's start off and get to know who you are.
Certainly. So again, Rachel, thank you so much for having me on. I am delighted to be able to talk to you and talk to your audience. Like you said, this has been a long time coming. We've spoke about doing this for so many times, and for it, fruition is really, really a pleasure. So a little bit about me. If I could give my brief elevator pitch, I can say that when I look back on my life, one of the things that I've devoted my life to is a life of service and a life up to the law. I spent my entire life being involved in the law, whether in the law enforcement capacity or as an attorney. And so I think I'm in a unique position because I've seen life on different sides and different spectrums of the law. I'm probably in my second or third iteration of a career, which is really interesting because when one grows up, they think that they're to be pigeonholed in one particular thing. And I wound up doing a lot of different things. And I think that's one of the great things about life is that you don't have to pigeonhole yourself to one thing. So I started my formal, we'll dispense with all of the how I was growing up and the fact that I liked ballet and I love to dance and I love the arts, and move forward into my first professional career. So for 26 years, I served as a member of the New York City Police Department. I held a number of ranks. My last rank was deputy inspector, which is 2 ranks under being chief. So I was a police officer, I was a detective, I was a sergeant, I was a lieutenant, I was a captain, and one of the things I'm very proud of being the captain, I was the 5th African-American woman ever to attain the rank of
That
captain.
is amazing. I remembered you saying that. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. Tell me, how did you get to that level and that rank? What did it take for you to get there?
Sure. So one of the things that I was very fortunate about is that I was able to have mentors and supporters along the way. And I had the pleasure of working with one of the first women to become a captain in New York City Police Department. I'm going to say her name, Joyce Stevens. And she said something to me once that I always thought about. And what she said was being a captain was the proudest moment of her life because it was that point that she felt that she could attain through her own accomplishments and not having to worry about politics and other maneuvering and positioning you have to do to get ahead. And so with that, the first part of it was a lot of hard work and studying. In policing, your initial promotions up through the level of middle level management are all achieved through written tests, a combination of written, physical test examinations. So that involved a lot of commitment, studying hard. I would take a vacation for a month, and when I was fortunate enough to, and other times have to work and study to ensure that I achieved the highest grades possible on those promotional exams. And so after that, there's specific probationary periods and observation periods. But in each one of those, I was able to do that. After becoming a captain, moving to the levels beyond that in the requires additional networking and navigating and positioning yourself, and trying to figure out how to be intentional about where you see yourself and how you can best get there. So I was fortunate or a challenge in other ways in navigating all of those things.
And I think it's amazing as a woman to be in the police force and law. I mean, these are typically positions or roles that for women they're not typically in. But you, I would imagine, was a trailblazer when you think back on that in terms of your career. And then having someone like Joyce, was that her name? Like Joyce, that you could look up to. I think that that's amazing, especially today, what you could offer, like the next generation, to see that you can have a career, right, in the police force. I want to go back to what school did you go to, and did that, and a little bit about what might be a little bit emotional for you, but I think having a father figure that influenced your career. Let's hear about that before we move into the next segment.
Sure. So I originally did not want to become a police officer. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a dancer. I had a lot of other professional pursuits, but I grew up in a household. My dad grew up in New York. My mom was from the South. And for African Americans during that time, they felt the best way to be successful was through civil service jobs because it provided you a level of support and security.
My dad said too. Yep.
Yep. In private industry, and you're going to have a pension. My dad had a story that he worked for a company and the intercom was on, and they were talking about offering my dad a raise, and somebody said those kind of people don't need that kind of money, and he walked away from the job in tears. But in civil service, in government jobs, your salary is relatively set. Now there's other perks that can be negotiated, but for the most part, you earn what you know you're going to earn, and it's very clear. So for my parents, that was sort of the best way to go. So when I had other aspirations of thinking about business, when I realized that I couldn't count, so math, and I was actually an accounting major, I don't know how that happened.
That was me.
Yeah, at university, being one of the few women, young ladies of color, wanting to aspire to being a business major. I remember walking to the classroom and opening the door and turning around, everybody staring at me, and I realized I didn't look like anybody in the room. But my dad said, look, honey, and my dad was a NYPD detective. He was a first grade detective, which is this level of ranks in the detective where, and there were very few African Americans that reached the rank of first grade detective. And so he said to me, you're expensive, you have expensive taste, so I can't afford you. So you're gonna need to be able to support yourself. And he said, I can't help you navigate different industries. I can't help you navigate being a lawyer, being a doctor where I could, but I can help you navigate law enforcement. And so their mantra was, regardless of what you were doing, if you were in college, you were going to study and take every civil service exam. So I took the court officer exam, I took the dog catcher exam, they paid for it, they would pick me up and drag me. And it was because they wanted to make sure that I had great test taking skills. So I took those tests. In between that transition of attending St. John's University, the New York City Police Department offered a program called the Police Cadet Corps, and that's been talked about because it's some of the budget's being cut for that program. So I transferred to John Jay with the thought of joining the Police Cadet Program, but I had more credits that necessary to enter at that point. And I majored in government and public administration because since I really like business, government and business are sort of cousins in terms of the origin and thought. It's very similar. And so I had accepted a position to be a legislative intern in Albany. And I was so excited. I had an assemblywoman to sponsor me. I was going to have my first apartment. It was a brownstone in Albany. It was great. Then all of a sudden, the police department called. I was 20 years old. And, my dad kind of said, well, this opportunity is just an internship. This is a career.
Right.
You can try it for 6 months, but if you don't like it, you can do other things. But he also knew how to trick me. So, after the 6 months, I joined the police department reluctantly, like kicking the tires because, I'm the girly girl. Like I want to know.
Right. I know.
Think
right.
But after that period, and I graduated successfully with a 90+ average in the police academy, my dad said, I didn't think you were going to make it. I'm a very competitive person. So I was like, I'll show you. And, wound up getting promoted and outranking him, which he was very proud of. And, so he was a very big influence in my life in policing. He would even come visit me. I would make an arrest and he would come visit and make sure I was doing okay. But everyone knew him, so they would let him in. They would let him into the booking area. And he's like, "Did you search the prison?" And I'm like, "Daddy, shh." Right. Let me be me. Right. So a very very big influence in my life. And
that's amazing.
helped me in that way.
That is amazing. And what I want to do is now we're going to have to take a break, but I want to come back and really build upon that influence to what you're doing today, living
Okay,
while Black, blue, and pink.
got it.
We'll be right back.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination. But don't just imagine. Use STEM to change the world.
Who's with me?
Oh, it's gonna hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
And we are back with my guest, Charlene Brown Wyans. And the first segment really touched me because I know the reason why you went into the police force was because of your dad. I know that he was a great influencer on you. And right now, it's just interesting in this time frame with the recent incident with George Floyd and the police, going from social distancing to social justice is what I would call it during these past couple of months. I'm just curious, you started something, and I'm not sure if that had something to do with it, but working while Black, blue, and pink. I want to learn a little bit more about that. And I think our audience would want to know a little bit more about how did you get started with that? Why did you get started? And then what have you done so far? And what are you planning to do? Because I'm loving it. Every time I see it, I actually participated in your first Facebook Live meeting that you had around the topic. It was live. It was very interactive. And I just think it's very timely. And this, when you talk about service, this is a service not only to your country, but to the community and to your family and friends. So take it away, Charlene.
Sure. So during my police career, I've also engaged in consulting and training and also commanded community affairs and community engagement. And one of the things that I always struggled with was to ensure that all communities had the capacity and the informed level of education to make informed asks to access government services.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that not enough people really understand how local government works, how to manage it, how to leverage it, and ensure that they get the correct level of service. So flash forward to the George Floyd incident, and I'm not going to recount the rage that I shared, and I'm sure the rage and the pain that I felt, not only as a woman, as an African-American woman, and also what it meant, for police and what it meant for George Floyd in that moment. And in the midst of the fact that, it looked like we were fighting two diseases, the disease of—
Absolutely, yes.
and as we're all, socially distancing in our homes to watch that, I was deeply impacted. And different people were impacted in different ways. Some people felt that it was important to go out and protest. But being in law enforcement, I had worked and managed a lot of protests, and I felt I could give in a different way. I've also been very passionate about when I do see experts and pundits that talk and share perspectives, they don't look like me. And in this moment, I felt that I wanted to talk, I wanted to share, and I wanted to present a different perspective. And with that, I thought of the name and the concept, Living While Black, Blue, and Pink, because there are women in law enforcement. And over the years, since the 80s, it's been an increase of women in policing and women of prominence in policing. There are women police chiefs now, thankfully, all over the country.
Yes.
And I don't think that's a story that's told enough and seen enough. And with that in mind, I decided to create a platform where women in law enforcement can share their perspectives. What does it mean to be a mom and to be a police officer? What does it mean to be an African American to be a police officer? What does it mean to be a police officer? And how does that function in intersectionality? How can I share information and insights that I have and knowledge that I have to help inform communities so they can make that informed ask? So I assembled some colleagues of mine of different ranks. I was very intentional in who I selected. So myself, I represented the executive rank, and I'm also an attorney. I brought in a colleague of mine who was one of the first African-American women chiefs in the police department and spent her entire career in the patrol area. I've done a number of things in policing, but she specifically worked in patrol for her 30 plus years. I brought in another colleague and dear friend who also has a law degree, and she was a sergeant, and another friend and colleague who was a detective and shared her perspectives. And what we did just thought was going to be a whim turned into a movement, because in the first 2 days we had over 1,500 views, and it was only supposed to be an hour brief conversation.
It went over an hour for sure. It did.
And I was a little concerned at first starting the webinar, because there were a lot of open wounds and people were still very, very angry about the law.
It was very raw at that time. So tell me, just quickly, hopefully this is still not painful for you, but as a police officer, as a Black woman, as a mom, what was running through your head when you saw the showing of the police officer with the knee to the neck? I mean, what was running through your mind from your perspective? I mean, I have mine, as a civilian, right? But you are in law enforcement. What was your initial reaction to that?
Yeah, and thank you for that question, because many times when I'm hearing about incidents, a shooting or some sort of incident, I'm also sort of analyzing it from the perspective as a former manager in policing and the investigation and the justification of the level of force. But the visceral response was almost sort of the same, but a little bit deeper, because I know that wasn't proper. And so the level of anger that some people have just watching it, I was even angrier because I know that's not proper.
That's it.
I know that was wrong.
Yeah.
And then also, the feeling, understanding the ambivalence of the other officers around, because there was the conversation about the inaction of the other officers, and I kind of understand why that happens.
Right.
Moment. So it's just a very raw emotional feeling, especially seeing police officers are human and they make mistakes, but this far exceeded the mistake. But the legacy of George Floyd, that this sort of watershed moment that's happening.
That's what we call it, this moment, right?
This moment, and I don't want it to be a moment,
right?
Which is why I started this webinar, which now turned into a platform, because I added a Facebook page as a platform where I regularly share information, articles, because now is the time for communities to really express and explain what they want their police departments to look like, and how we can both move in partnership to this, because it is a joint and shared responsibility. And the words defunding and very, to me, words that are painful, because they're words that are trying to take things away. Defunding is an action,
right,
and negative action, and doesn't necessarily reflect the narrative of everyone, because I don't think everyone wants a lawless community. So
Charlene, with all that's going on that we've seen in the community, the riots, the protests, and the actions of the police, right? And the reactions to the community to want to defund the police, what are your thoughts about what's happening now?
So what I think is happening right now is, from the community perspective, I think there's been so many open wounds, and so people are expressing their feelings of outrage, personal experiences, and because of that, on the one hand, it's sort of deflecting from the real issue. On the police perspective, I think that from an organizational perspective, some organizations are feeling a little bit beat up, and they're feeling defensive. And so when you have people that are angry and hurting on one side, and people that are defensive on the other side, it's going to deflect from what the real issue is. This has opened up so many different conversations, but I think the true conversation that has to happen is, why does unreasonable force happen in incidents that involve low-level offenses? My thing is, treat all the bad guys the same. whoever killed those people in the church in Charleston, that person's still alive. But then someone that's selling Lucy cigarettes, or someone that sent a $20 for a bill. So, and so I think that's the real question around those issues. I don't think there's any debate about that mad killer that's killing 60, 50 people. And, I don't hear people asking, why was there unreasonable force in those instances? Right. Everyone needs to sort of narrow, really start thinking about trying to focus the conversation first about that issue and incident, and work to address that. And as we unpeel the layers, we can start to move on to some of the other issues that have plagued policing in communities, and certain communities, for decades, centuries.
And we're going to come back and talk about that. So we're going to take a quick break and come back and continue the conversation around social justice.
I already knew that I was going to go to college, from a young age. I definitely want to major in political science, become the mayor or something, make the situation better for other people. My name is Justin, and I am your dividend.
And we are back with Charlene. And Charlene, we don't have enough time to talk about all this.
So I need to come back. You need to invite me back.
Let's really get to a couple of core things. One, I'm in corporate America. I focus on diversity in corporate America, but you and I have had a conversation. There are numerous parallels between social justice and what's been going on in the police force and what I have been and my colleagues and peers have been trying to resolve for in corporate America. Share with us what your thoughts are in terms of some of those parallels.
Sure. So I think one of the parallels is that, while people started to have conversations about policing, then corporate started to have conversations and say, hey, how have we been treating our customers and our clients?
Absolutely.
How are we treating our employees? Are we doing some of the same things? And I applaud that, but every day that I talk to some of my friends and colleagues in corporate, they talk about how exhausting it is. And so I want to draw that as a parallel. Imagine how exhausting it must be to be an officer of color in this moment in time. I was just reading an article today, and someone said that he's not Black enough for his community, but not blue enough for his community.
Wow. Wow.
Because you can see the perspectives on all sides, and you're being pulled at all sides. And so it's a very draining thing. One of the things I do have to say and applaud private industry is that they are making some of these statements, and we can have conversations about the authenticity of that and the sustainability of that.
And Charlene, we never did this before, right? So you never had the conversation of social justice go past the doors of the building, right? Politics, all of that would stay outside. But because of this incident and this moment that, again, I'm with you, do not want this to be the moment, the conversations, what we're calling courageous conversations, have taken place. And hopefully, I'm hopeful that it's moving the needle. At least people are acknowledging, which is what surprises me, and we've talked about this, that there was even an issue to start with, right? Why are we protesting? Why is there an issue? Why are police doing this, right?
So I think that some of the courageous conversations that are happening in private industry, I would like to see police departments be open to a culture change where courageous conversations can happen internally. And I'd like to, my goal is to work with communities and police departments to figure out how to help have those courageous conversations in that way. And you can attest to it, because this is the work you do every day. It takes work, and you have to be in a certain space to do that. And that's about culture. And when I hear about a lot of the police reforms, I'm hearing changes in the law and cutting out money. Making someone do something and taking money away to force somebody
is not. It's
not the answer. It makes you do it because you have to, but we really want people to do things because they want to. And so we have to think about what that means to get it from have to want to do.
Now, Charlene, do you think, I've often wondered this, do you think that police officers who are not from a particular community, they're just not, I thought about this, is it that they're not sensitized to the issues of the community to really be able to serve them? And if and if we think that's what it is, how do we get them there? Like, how do we immerse them to understand the culture, the history, to really be able to be this person that when they come into the community, people trust them? I'm more concerned about the trust right now. I know when I see them, I get a little concerned because no one, it doesn't matter who you are. We've seen women, kids, it seems that way. But what do you think it is? Do you think it's not having that experience? Because you did say there was an African American, right, who felt like he was not Black enough, right, to serve the community. So what do you think about that?
He was being told that he wasn't Black enough.
Oh, he was being told enough, right? Told that he was not.
So there was someone I was watching on the news this morning, and he talked about how young children, because he's writing books about teaching race to your children in your household. See, it all starts at home, because we have to remember that police officers are they reflect society. So, sensitivity training, you can't train a person, you can't train all the biases out of a person.
Right.
I think as society, we have to come to a point and realize that people have biases. We have people that have prejudices, and we're all born with them. So, no one's beyond them. And there is racism in this country. It exists, instead of acting like it doesn't exist. So I say that to say, it's about who we're picking and who's taking the profession, who's choosing to enter in the profession, and who stays there and creates those barriers and blockages. Because there are some very good officers that don't look like me that get it. They understand communities, and they can police respectfully, and they have built trust, and they have disarmed people and engaged in confrontations and not had to shoot or mace or tase people. They're out there. They are out there. So it's not about training somebody. You don't flip off a switch and, hey, I'm tolerant. It just doesn't happen.
It's going to take time, right? I think
time to work. And maybe careful thought about screening who we're selecting to come in.
Absolutely. And on that note, why don't you share and give some advice for the next generation of girls, right, as they are looking to you as a role model? What advice would you give them, knowing all that's going on now, to be a really good police officer, but also to ascend to be executive in the police force? What would you say?
So I think, although this may be a time that people may want to run in the opposite direction and not join law enforcement, I think now is the time that people that want to make a change should join the department. And, because I always hear a little boy or girl say, when I grow up, I want to be a police officer. I want to hear little boys and girls, and particularly little girls, say, when I grow up, I want to be the police commissioner. When I grow up, I want to be the police captain. When I grow up, I want to be the police chief. And it can be done, because we have done it. We have opened that door. But we can't do it alone. We can't do it in a vacuum, because it's hard to make those courageous decisions when you're alone.
I am always a fan. I can't wait to see the next segment that you do. And we know that this is not going away, right? You can't change a culture overnight. So I am hopeful that your perspectives will be taken seriously. You have a voice, you continue with your voice, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else you're going to do while living Black, blue, and pink.
Thank you. We'll be a part two.
Yes. And this concludes our segment. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.